welcome to the January 2026 Crafted Briefing. As with all our briefings, we're going to be recording this, so if you do have to step out, this will be sent along later. And if you've got any questions at all, speak with your client teams or get in touch with us afterwards. Obviously, due to the time of year, this is really a case of both looking back into what we talked about in 25 and also looking forward in 26. Here is a list of things that we went through in 2025 and topics that really became part of the conversation that marketers are having to have day in, day out, either with internal teams or obviously trying to keep ahead of what's happening outside their own brands and organisations. Now, when we look forward into 26, many of these are still absolutely part of the conversation. Some of them, like AI agents, have moved quite a bit in that time about what's available to consumers and also to advertisers and brands. From my point of view, obviously, we talk about things internally. So I actually went round and we asked a few of the crafties what they thought was on the agenda for 2026.
I think 2026 will be the year when we finally see agentic AI explode into the SEO world with a lot more force than it has done previously. We've just got our heads around generative AI, and I think agentic AI is a logical next step. Some of the big players are releasing commerce protocols that will enable clients and enable publishers to connect their data directly with these platforms. So SEO will become more about optimizing for these machines as well as optimizing for our human audiences. We've long optimized for various different target audiences, and I think AI platforms will just become another one. I think with Google's announcement of its Universal Commerce Protocol that released just recently, we'll have to think more about our structured data and how our product feeds are structured, and also building up brand awareness to give the AI models the signals to cite us in the first place. So agentic AI will be my prediction to be big during 2026, but I think the consumer behaviour may take a little longer to shift towards being comfortable with purchasing directly through AI platforms.
This year, I think marketers will take a step back and remember the basics. Yes, data quantity is shrinking, but the quality of the remaining data should be cared for. Connect up more platforms, feed analytics data into the CRM, and vice versa. When looking at marketing budget decisions, there needs to be a broad view. As has always been the case, the influence of activity in certain areas goes beyond the conversion counts that are directly attributed to it. Incrementality is certainly a bit of a buzzword, but when analysed properly, it can uncover the hidden value from not only the usual marketing activity, but CRO, A/B testing, offline advertising, and even website development updates.
I think 2026 will be the year where consumers become a bit more skeptical around the use of AI in communications from brands. We've already seen a little bit of backlash around AI's usage in Christmas adverts, and consumers are becoming privy to which ads are being done through AI.
Something that we're seeing that is increasingly a trend and that will come more into play for the rest of the year is using more authentic style content. So more user-generated content or lo-fi style creative is really becoming popular, and that's for a good reason. It's because people want that more genuine, authentic connection. People want to see people's real reviews in a world of ever-increasing more AI, more commercial type content. People want to see someone's genuine thoughts and feelings around a product, service, or attraction. So that's really important to include in your ads. It can also be used in your organic owned channels as well, and also even traditional. We're discussing that with some of our clients as well, bringing in this less polished, less produced style of content into the things that they own as well, and more traditional. And that's really important because it gives the users an idea of what the real experience might look like, rather than a polished or retouched version of that service that might be a bit edited and not too genuine. They want to see what it really looks like, that real sneak peek into what that product looks like. Also, it's really important that the ads are entertaining, or the content's entertaining as well. That's something that really allows the user to want to stick around. They want to watch it because it's really engaging, rather than just knowing it's an ad and wanting to skip straight away. So keeping those ads entertaining and more lo-fi is really important moving forwards.
As you can see, a lot of what we are talking about has got a centre of gravity around this change of agentic AI and what is happening within the channels that we're using. But as we'll talk here about more later, a lot of it is also about the really good stuff about authenticity and what that means. To take the first of those sort of topics, and this we covered into last year, but really is only diversified. And that's the battle for the budget and the channels that you can use and the availability of the channels that are open to marketers that perhaps either weren't available to you a year ago or certainly are now rising in prominence. As part of this conversation, though, whether it's connected TV, as we'll talk about, or mobile and device or social, actually there is still so many hours in the day. And even if we are on mobiles or second screens, or whether it's desktop, whether it's connected TV, we're actually still broadly doing the similar sort of type of activity as we have been doing almost 10 years ago. Just perhaps the platform is different, the topic is different, the way we consume that media is different. But fundamentally, actually, we're still humans that are behaving quite similarly to what we have done over time. And what that means is, one of the things that we are doing is, whether we're watching TV, but we're now watching YouTube, is video is really coming to the fore as one of those key channels that both marketers are putting more investment into. As an agency, we are absolutely advocating for that because it really allows you to tell that story. Here, data from the IAB shows that nearly £36 billion of video spend really is driven by the performance for the brands that have embraced it and what they can see. Now, connected TV, which is using either YouTube or Netflix or whatever on a TV, is still, relative to total revenues from Meta, slightly less. One of the key points here is actually that whereas social spending is very much about Meta and TikTok, relatively few very large social channels, connected TV is a lot more diversified. There are only 3 channels that have got more than 10% share. So YouTube, obviously driven by the Google machine, Amazon and Disney. The rest split are actually quite wide and quite deep, and that's reflected in the viewers' numbers. YouTube is still there, but it's not as dominant as, say, Facebook or Meta is in the social space. And really what that allows as a marketer is you have access to more inventory, you have access to more audiences, and because you can buy this programmatically, increasingly allows you to really be able to hone into a channel that was never really available unless you had large traditional media budgets. In terms of the growth of programmatic and digital out of home, digital audio is bought programmatically. So that's through ad exchanges that agencies like ourselves can then buy that inventory in the places to the audiences that we all want. And what you can see here is that this rise of programmatic is really dramatic, but really the difference between this coming year and perhaps 4 or 5 years hence is less that the growth is within the online space of platforms and publishers, and really the growth is in things like the connected TV and the digital out of home that will be bought programmatically in ways that really weren't available a few years ago. And it's not just about the channels that are different, the types of ads that are available are too. So here you have shoppable ads. So this is where within the ad format, you can buy the products that are featured. This is a format that now pretty much every platform has their version of. And it really shows the fact that consumers want to respond to video. They want to see a product in use, but then have that onward journey into a shopping experience. The other formats is those involving things like QR codes. And what's definitely we're seeing is that consumers are happy having to interact. They might be on a screen, but they might then use a QR code or something onto their personal device to then continue that conversation. This is a new ad format from Google that reflects that. And the really key point here coming into this year is that it's a non-linear customer journey. It's not that you would see an ad somewhere and you then go into and you do a search and then you see a remarketing ad and that is your journey. It's really only getting more complex. And what that means is a brand and as advertisers, you need to be in more places because that touch point will have different aspects to it that the consumers that you're trying to contact and get in front of will respond to. Everything from the social platforms they're using, potentially to the LLMs and the generative AI platforms, through to the more sort of traditional search engines. So it's more a continuation of prediction, but actually ramping up is that we're going to see more expansion of ad options across digital channels. Now that'll be across twofold. One is the actual formats themselves, like the shoppable ads that came in. We're seeing that all the platforms are really driving different formats, whereas that probably 1 to 2 years ago was more that it's like put more money into existing formats. That proliferation has really come from the second part, which is users are behaving differently and more nuanced, and whether they're watching YouTube on their mobile, on their desktop, or on a connected TV, they're still watching YouTube, but YouTube needs ad formats that reflect how media is being consumed. The next topic we're going to talk about is how Google is really accelerated. I mentioned in a previous briefing that Google put out a red notice that AI and OpenAI was going to be almost an existential threat. They have absolutely delivered in the last half of last year, and really they're the ones that are on the up and have got the most momentum behind them. Biggest thing of all at the moment is that Apple has chosen Gemini and Google to be their partner for the AI technology that will driven the Apple models. So one thing here is that Apple have always been incredibly privacy focused, and they wanted to pick a partner, or they have picked a partner that meant that they could use this technology but use it within their own sort of cloud and within their own four walls, so that actually that same level of privacy of data as people get within their iCloud account, within iMessage, where Apple hasn't got access to it, still applies. And as we'll see later, a little bit of the backlash around AI is this sort of privacy initiative. So I really think this is a really strong offering, both from Google's point of view, but allows Apple to do a really big catch up because they absolutely have lagged behind in this space. Another thing Google have done is their Universal Commerce Protocol. We mentioned before how OpenAI have created the ability for AI agents to connect with things like Shopify stores to be able to do an end-to-end checkout within an AI agent chat. What Google has now done is made this UCP, which will become just like schema is on a website that you may know from an SEO or technical point of view, even down to sort of the bare bones HTML. It will become a default standard protocol. If it's got Google behind it, immediate validation. If it's got the fact that Google open source it, so it's not just tied to them and it's open for everybody, I really think that this will be something that e-commerce will be considering over the next 12, 24, 36 months as being, if I want to have that almost two-tier system, I want my website to be able to have that experience that people will need, but I need agents to interface with it. UCP, I think, will be the dominant opportunity there. Again, Google are releasing things like business agents. So this is basically taking what is broadly effectively like a website chatbot and moving it onto a Google property, whether that's, in this case, example here for search. It will also be things like, we can see that happening, whether it's what opening hours are in Maps. But one key thing here is it allows you to have a certain level of control, or at least it says you have a certain level of control over things like tone of voice and what it answers. So again, Google are really trying to think this actually is not a bad use case for a user and therefore applying it. We talked in 25 about AI agents. They were very much a thing that people were pushing and it was part of the narrative. They're starting to come through at scale, perhaps not as fast, shock horror, as some people said in some of the headlines in 25, but they're really starting to take up. Now, This is, Google advocating for fundamental shifts in people's behaviour. We absolutely do see it for certain people and certain categories that the AI, as in that kind of chat experience, LLM experience, has changed behaviour. Perhaps not quite to this level of strength that some of the headlines come out, but what we do see, and I think I agree with the premise of this, is that all consumers are using this opportunity to just do a little bit more exploration, ask more questions that perhaps they wouldn't have done. They would have come to your site a little bit earlier to try and find the information. They might be doing that a little bit further within either the search results and things like AI mode, or obviously on things like ChatGPT. Kantar have said 24% people using AI shopping assistants, 24% of people that are AI users have stated that they're using an AI shopping assistant. I'm not saying I think this is a lie, but perhaps I think this is slightly overstating what we're certainly seeing in the real use case. And I think whether that's the definition of AI users might be more AI power users, but this feels a little bit strong for us. But what I would say is that this is absolutely a direction and something that will only probably increase over time. Equally, quite where it settles is a little bit unknown. And as we'll talk about in a bit, the strongest brands are those that shape the story AI is telling, but that's more about the fact that what are the signals that you're giving it? What are you, as its understanding about your brand? So all of the things, whether that's your PR, your commentary off-site, your reviews, all of the things that it can use to form an opinion about your brand, they still count. Now, whether that's SEO, whether it's obviously paid activity, whether it's just general customer service, those are still core. So one thing we have is people, what should be my strategy? Your strategy is doing what you're doing really, really well, because they are still the signals that AI, however this does pan out in terms of user behavior, etc., they're still the signals that it uses. In terms of these sorts of trust signals, what are users liking? Are they accepting of it? Are they wanting to see more? Here is one of those, it's not technically wrong, but it's, the headline is perhaps got a little bit more nuance behind it of, Britain's more likely to find search engine summaries trustworthy than not. The difference there is they're comparing 42% that said they were fairly or very trustworthy with the 35% that said they were not, kind of ignoring that big middle of 23% that weren't so sure. And one thing here that we've been discussing internally is actually one key factor here is what are the AI summaries about? If that is, is bicarb of soda and baking powder the same thing, that you probably would feel that could be quite trustworthy. Whereas, is this the best car I can drive, or is there something that's a little bit more nuanced, or it's a little bit more important to you, it's a larger purchase? There are probably things where you're going to feel that it's less trustworthy. And obviously, as we've highlighted before, AI summaries typically are a little bit more focused on sort of facts and informational searches. So I actually think this is probably a little bit more representative of people steering away from it. And if you read the full article here from YouGov, actually later, one of the things is even if they find it trustworthy, I think there is a bit of a sense from users that they kind of prefer that there was fewer of them and they won't be quite so prominent as they have been. No discussion around 2026 and/or AI would be right without saying that, sort of finishing on the topic of OpenAI, because they obviously were one of the ones that led the charge. 2-3 years ago, when they really came to prominence and ChatGPT became part of the zeitgeist, it really has been quite a big change. I just want to give more context around this. We've talked before about literally $1 trillion of spend that they have committed going forward. The FT reported that in the first half of last year they were operating at a loss of $6 billion. That sounds like a lot. It's actually in sort of these weird tech terms. Not so much. $6 billion is make a lot of difference to anybody. But the point being is they're not already a profitable, growing business. They are still relying on subscriptions and some other things like model API costs and things. and they are not successful commercially as they are gunning for a payment day later down the line. Again, we've said before, one of the ways that they can pay for this is to have ads running on the platform. Openly, I absolutely thought they were going to do this in 2026. It's a little bit early, but they've already said in January that they're going to start this for certain users, and I think they're starting in the US first. They have said initially ads won't influence responses, and there'll be a level of impartiality to them. I would be staggered if that's where it stays, and I certainly think I'll be staggered if the public sentiment reflects what they say externally. But I think this is a real sign that actually ChatGPT is starting to have to realise that they've got to monetize all the spend that they're doing on the data centres, on all the infrastructure that they're buying. And while this is also further forward, I think OpenAI seem to be one of the ones where people are referencing them more in this sort of anti-AI sentiment. There you've got, why 26 could be the year of anti-AI marketing, almost making a stand. And what we're seeing is certain platforms, certain people are coming out and stating we will never use AI in our ads or in our product or however it is, and we won't train it on data. And a bit like that harmony between Apple and Google, I really think one of the only reasons why that got to that point was the fact that there would be an element of privacy around it. And I think if you are an Apple user, quite often that privacy element that Apple have and their ethics and morals around it will be one of the reasons why you might be more of an advocate and stay within their ecosystem. And I think things like AI, I won't go into there because AI will have access to everything. You may have seen the end of last year, there were how to turn off AI reading your emails and various things that came up that really people was reflecting a bit of a feeling of, how far will this go? What will it have access to? And one thing with authenticity is you can't fake it. It really is something that vast majority of consumers will see through, and just by saying something is authentic, there's so many examples where brands have put something out and people have really, as soon as it's exposed, there's backlash even bigger than they were expecting. And I really believe for brands leading into 26, this is one of those things of just how can we talk about ourselves in the authentic way? How can we show who we are in the right way, maybe through diversified channels, to really deliver that movement? This, I think, was really epitomised by Merriam-Webster choosing the 2025, the word of the year was slop. Now, AI slop, which is content or items such as video or images generated at scale, usually obviously through these generative AI. What that means is that it's really reflective of this view that at the moment, AI is not viewed as a value add. It's usually viewed as, well, you're doing that because you're cost saving. You're doing that because it's just easy to churn out, rather than there's a craft behind it, and that there's not that feeling that AI can produce things perhaps of the same value and with the authenticity of something that might have more of the human touch. So leading into this year, if you aren't already, I'm sure authenticity is probably the word that is going to come up in most marketers' planning and strategy meetings. I therefore predict that probably by about May, we'll be sick of it and it will be overused. But certainly at the moment, that is, and the premise of it is absolutely the right thing. This was a quote that was found within the team, and as soon as it circulated, I knew it was going to be a slide in the next briefing. And this is about the fact that we can all, ourselves included, and brands, be focused on that. What's this last click attribution? What's this ROAS? What's all the technicality about what we do? But it really won't deliver the same feeling as that emotional response. And you can't get that cultural relevance, that moment, only through programmatic and these channels. You need to combine both. You need to combine the ability of distribution through this with the creative and the idea and the brand story that actually people care about. And whether this is, as here, the use of creators to perhaps provide a different viewpoint on your brand, for our client, the Natural History Museum, just that whole, this is what my experience of something was. Now, that content creator investment, it can scale massively. TikTok Creator Marketplace can cover it, it's perhaps lower. And then obviously you've got the larger, more sort of, well-known influencers. The point being here is content creators, as long as they do something in their own style, that's the authenticity. Whether your own brand allows people in to show what you really are and how, in this case, things like an exhibition, I think really also just gives that signal, whatever is actually said, that people just go, okay, right, I can now see what I would feel if I was experiencing something like that. Everyone from the Unilevers, they control hundreds of the world's top FMCG brands, and they are feeling this. And this isn't new. I don't want to come across that this is something that has only happened in 2026. There's, authenticity, brand storytelling, etc., is absolutely being part of the conversation. But what we're seeing is that when the channels are digital, that is only increasing in terms of some of the skepticism of people individually thinking, maybe I just need to know a bit more about brand. And if you are Unilever, who controls these hundreds of brands globally, you really have to be paying attention to how can I individually, and obviously things like the Dove campaigns that they've done historically around showing real bodies, etc., have been part of that authenticity. Point here, and this is where I think is going to be a parting view, is that in 2026 there's going to be so much conversation around the machine, about the AI, about whether we're providing the universal commerce protocols and APIs and technicalities of LLMs, and whether we're providing information in the chunks that they wish to do, or that we have the technical infrastructure that can cope with delivering them that information. But if you take one thing away from this briefing, is that actually our ability to be more human, to realise what are those factors that our consumers really care about us, and marry them with the right, not all of it, but the right elements of that machine, that is going to be the marketer's win in 2026. So thank you very much for joining me in the January 26th briefing. As just heard, hopefully this is a year that all of us can be a little bit more human. Thank you.